I was born with a bit of cloud in my brain. You cannot see it from the outside, but it's always there. It tells me that when I'm outside in the rain, I need to stay there. That when I'm cold, I will never be warm again. And that when I leave the forest also leaves me. But none of that is true. The cloud is not lying or trying to throw shade. The cloud is just the cloud. And, well, clouds are gonna cloud. So with a little bit of awareness, a few useful tools, and a lot of practice, I can teach my brain that when I'm outside in the rain, I can get my umbrella and dance. And that when I'm cold, I can light a fire that will warm a whole village. And that when I've left the forest has not truly left me. At home, my view might not consist of hills and trees and black woodpeckers like it did in Schwarzwald. But there are flowers blooming and bees buzzing and little sparrows fluttering about in the garden. And all I have to do is learn how to see past the cloud and open my eyes to all of the beautiful things that are right in front of me. Hey you, welcome to my channel, A Year and a Day. My name is Jenny and my month of July was all about me settling in back home after my month and a half in Schwarzwald. I've shared a bit of my experience in the German Black Forest in my June video, which I will link down below in case you're interested. I don't want to bore anybody with repeating myself, but let me very quickly summarize the whole Schwarzwald thing in case you haven't seen any of my previous videos from the last few months. Basically, I've been dreaming about living in a forest for years and years now. And at the start of this year, I decided to make it happen. My husband couldn't join me because he cannot work remotely, which meant that he could drop me off and pick me up, but the rest of it I would be on my own. But I decided to go through with it anyways. So from the end of May until the first half of July, I was in the German Black Forest. I was renting an apartment and I was working there for about a month. And for almost 2 weeks I had some time off. But of course my afternoons and my weekends were also spent hiking and riding my bike around and just enjoying the beautiful scenery. But then in July the moment came where I had to return home again. And that was quite a harsh landing. I had enjoyed my time in the forest immensely. The peace and quiet there, the lack of noise and the view of trees and birds and all these other animals that inspired me every single day. Leaving that all behind and going back to a neighborhood filled with noises of neighbors and cars, the view of houses and streets. It was quite a transition. Now, don't get me wrong, I live in a wonderful neighborhood for which I'm very, very grateful. I don't even live in a big city And the neighborhood itself is not even super noisy or anything, but it was just the contrast with the forest that really stood out for me. So after getting back home, I really missed the forest. Even though it was wonderful being back home again and seeing my husband again and my cat and my friends and my family, I also just really needed to take some time to ground myself again. And one of the things that I immediately started doing when I arrived back home was doing a little bit of reorganization in my home and garden. I put my desk in a spot where I had a better view of the window, and I added some things to the garden to make it extra cozy. And slowly, after a week or so, I felt more at home again in my own home. But still, there is a lot to consider. My time in the forest really brought me some interesting insights, and it all kind of came together in the month of July. I had my last therapy session as well, which was also a sign that I was approaching the end of a chapter and about to start a new one. And one of the things that I really learned in therapy was to get more in touch with my body and the things that my mind needs, and stop fighting it so much or judging it. And finishing therapy doesn't mean that that is easy for me now. It is something that I will have to keep working on for a long time to come, I expect. But that's okay. I have become a little bit more aware of my own behavior. And I've been given some tools to deal with things a little bit differently. And already I've been noticing that the outcome of my actions is changing. The whole Schwarzwald adventure is, of course, a lovely example of that. For pretty much all of my life, an idea like that would have just been immediately shot down by myself. And I would tell myself that it would be impossible or too much of a hassle or too scary or whatever. But this year I managed to overcome all of those doubts and take the required actions to make it happen. For other people that might be a really small step, but for me that taught me a very important lesson. And it's something that I want to keep working on. So in July I really spent some time to ground myself back home and to ask myself what it was exactly that I loved so much about my time in the forest. And what my options would be to bring more of that into my life in the future. And in July, I took the time to really think about how I could turn that into action. Now, I still have a lot more questions than answers, but one of the things that I have started is a new adventure. For some reason, it felt like the right time to investigate a little bit more if I could find an organization or group of people that felt equally inspired and fascinated by nature and shared the same worldviews as myself. So I did some research and ended up at the site of Obod, which stands for the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. Even though I had heard of Druidry, I had also kind of assumed that it would be all about prescribed rituals and deity worshipping. And of course there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It just is not a right fit for me and my personal path and practice. But I very quickly found out that the way you can interpret modern day Druidry is very closely aligned to the personal practice I have already built for myself. And that was a really lovely thing to discover. Now, Druidry is a practice that you can easily follow on your own. There are a lot of resources online or books that have been written, and you can start that path all by yourself. But somehow I was very intrigued by the idea of joining an organization, seeking out community there as well. So I ended up ordering the introductory course that is offered by Obot. I've done the first 2 lessons on my own, and it was a lot of fun. It was lovely to discover that a lot of aspects related to Druidry are already a part of my daily practice. And at the same time, it also offered a lot of new insights and things that I can add. So in July, I officially started my Druid path by joining the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, and officially starting the Bardic grade. Like I said, the website of Obot already shares a lot of information about Druidry and also available resources, like a list of books that you can read on your own. One of the books mentioned was The Druid Way by Philip Gargom. I've known Philip Gargom from the Druidcraft Tarot, but he has also been a member of Obot for decades now and has also been head of the order in the past. So I decided The Druid Way would be a fun book to start off with. I decided to do a search for a second-hand copy and ended up finding a listing for 4 books on Druidry. When contacting the seller, it turned out they had another 4 books that they were willing to throw in for free. So in July I ended up with 8 books on Druidry. So these were the original 4 books that I was buying. The Druid Way by Philip Gargom, Living Druidry by Emma Russell-Orr, The Druidry Handbook by John Michael Greer, and The Path of Druidry by Penny Billington. I then was gifted the Handbook of Urban Druidry, Zen for Druids, The Awen Alone, and Druidcraft by Philip Gargom again. So I already made my way through these 2 books, of which I liked this one by Johanna van der Hoeven a little bit more. It was a little bit of a better fit for me and my practice. And I have now started reading The Druid Way. And it was just a very lovely thing that I was able to pick up all of these books for a very small price to get me started on my Druid Way. Let's proceed with some books of fiction that I've read in the month of July. In my June video I already showed Juniper, and since I've also read the sequel Wise Child and the sequel Coleman. Juniper and Wise Child are books that I've read in Dutch when I was around 11 years old, and they made a really big impact on me as a child. The books are set in the Middle Ages and revolve around witchcraft. In Juniper, a young girl is sent to live with a woman to be trained as a witch. That girl is called Juniper. Wise Child takes place about 18 years later, and it's about the girl who is taken in by Juniper and who becomes her pupil. Coleman is a book I had never read before, but it kind of closes off the trilogy and it picks up right where Wise Child left off. It was a lovely experience reading these books as an adult. I'm also very happy that I decided to read Coleman as well, to really bring the story to an end. So those are Juniper, Wise Child and Coleman by Monica Furlong. Next up is decks. And I have to admit, I haven't bought any new decks in these past few months. I am very happy with my collection at the moment, and even though there have been some interesting and intriguing decks out there, it has been quite easy to just use the decks that I currently have. That being said, I did receive some decks at the end of May that I haven't shown here yet, and I also received a couple of Kickstarters. So let's take a look at them. At the end of May, I received these two decks, the Frog Tarot and the Forgotten Legends Tarot. Let's start with the Forgotten Legends Tarot, because this is actually a deck that I already owned. And it is not something that I do often, but it does mean that I now have 2 copies of this deck. This is the first edition of the Forgotten Legends Tarot. It comes in a bigger box that arrived damaged from shipping, unfortunately. But I read on the side of the shop where I got this one that this is actually a known issue with this first edition. The first edition is not etched, but it's a beautifully illustrated deck. Now the second edition comes in a much smaller box. The deck is etched. And as you might be able to see, although I do not know if the camera will pick up on it, is that the colors of the second edition are a little bit more saturated, which means that they are a little bit darker than the first edition. You can see it a bit more on the back as well. Although again, I don't know if my camera will really pick up on it. Now, it was definitely not necessary for me to get the second edition with already having the first, but I just really think this deck is very beautiful. And I don't know, something came over me in the month of May and I was like, I am ordering this one. The first edition looks a little bit more faded, I guess, than the second one. And I do think the coloration of the second edition is just a little bit more beautiful than the first edition. So I'm not sure yet if I will be selling the first edition of the Forgotten Legends Tarot, or if I will just keep it and maybe use that one a little more intensively and have this as my backup copy. Like I said, I don't have a lot of decks in my collection that I have twice or that I have backup copies of. At the same time, like I said, I think it's a beautiful deck and I don't think I would mind it for this one to have 2 different editions. And that is the Forgotten Legends Tarot. The same webshop was selling this one, the Frog Tarot. This is the shop that I got both of these decks from. And this was just very simply a case of me wanting to make the most out of my shipping costs, which is an insane reason to spend more money on a deck. But at the same time, it's just also a really good excuse to get another deck. And especially when it features nothing but frogs. I believe this one is also a second edition, which has this beautiful bright green gilding. The cards itself are quite glossy and pretty sturdy. So if you are a riffle shuffler, this might be an issue for you. Personally, I'm a hand-over-hand shuffler, so this is not necessarily a problem for me. As I've understood, this is a collaboration deck, which means the deck features quite a lot of different illustration styles. And the funny thing is that I kind of don't really like collaboration decks that have a lot of different styles. I often tend to like one style over the other or others, and then end up not liking half the deck. Somehow it was not really an issue for me with this deck, and that's maybe because it features all these different characters, these different frogs. I don't think that this would be a deck where I would pull a lot of cards at the same time. I have the same thing with landscape decks, for example. I much rather pull a landscape for a certain day. And the same thing goes for little characters like these. And the times that I've already used this deck, I will just pull one frog of the day to kind of set a certain mood. And when using the deck like that, it doesn't really matter that there are all these different styles, because I only get confronted with the one card that I have pulled for that day. So I've actually been really enjoying using this deck. And I would love to add another frog deck to my collection somewhere in the future that maybe has a little bit more of a uniform style. But for now, I am really happy that I added this fun frog tarot to my collection. Next up is the Exile Tarot, the Silent and Awaken edition in a tin. This was a recent Kickstarter by the same illustrator as the Monsoon Tarot. Now, the Monsoon Tarot is a deck that I have not really used a lot yet, and it's one of those decks that I'm not really sure about within my collection. I do really like the illustration style, and that is of course what drew me to this Kickstarter. There were a lot of different editions available within the Kickstarter. There was kind of a deluxe edition, which was standard tarot sized, and then there were also these smaller sizes in a tin. I didn't really like the font used on the bigger cards. And I also don't really have any decks in a tin within my collection, so I like the idea of going for these little mini versions. Then you could choose between the Silent and Awaken edition. Basically, both versions have the same illustrations, but details are kind of different between the two. In the Silent edition, a lot of the characters don't have really any facial features, and it's just overall a little bit more dark, whereas the Awaken edition has more faces and stuff like that. So let's take a look at them. Let's start with the actual tins that the decks come in. To be completely honest, I was a little bit not impressed by the overall quality of these, and I know that I should nitpick or be mean towards the creators, but I was just a bit underwhelmed by it. For example, in the tins you have this kind of fold in the metal, and then instead of having that on the back of the tins, it is in the front, which I don't think is that beautiful, to be honest. Then when you open the tins, you open them from above, and there is this kind of plastic inlay in which the book and the cards come in. So I was kind of hoping for a cute, compact little tin that fitted the cards beautifully, but instead you get quite a big tin with some printing on it, and then the plastic inside. which just feels a bit, you know, yeah, it doesn't really do it for me. But at the end of the day, those are details, you know, and it's all about the cards itself, of course. Someone asked me in the comments to do kind of a comparison video of these. I haven't gotten around to doing that yet. I don't think, let me see. Okay, so the silent one is still in order. Yeah, and I shuffled the Awaken edition. The guidebooks have the smallest text I have ever seen in a guidebook. Like, that's small. Now, I don't want to bash the decks or anything, but I guess sometimes this can happen when you are backing a Kickstarter. You know, it's not Amazon, it's not like you are ordering an existing product that you can watch flip-throughs of or whatever. You'll just need to be patient and find out if the product will actually be what you had expected. Now, as you can see, these guidebooks hold both the meanings for the Awaken and the Silent editions, and it is fully illustrated. So even if you only have one of the two editions, you can also then see the illustration that comes with the other deck. But the meanings are the same for all the cards. I like that there is this little quote for every card. And then you also get a vision message and keywords for every card. So you do get a lot of information in a small guidebook. And then we have the actual decks. I absolutely love the design on the backs of the cards. I like that it is quite an unusual color combination, something that I wouldn't pick myself, but that somehow really works for me. And then the cards are quite small. We can compare it to the Frog Tarot, which is standard tarot size, and as you can see, the mini versions of the Exiled Tarot are quite a bit smaller. They have this linen finish and they are quite bendy. And as you can see, the artwork is quite whimsical. Just like the Monsoon Tarot, it has almost this like dreamscape kind of vibe to it. So this is the Awaken edition, where you have quite distinct faces. And then we have the Silent edition, which is just a little bit more dark. Then if we can compare, for example, the World card. And the Eight of Cups. And sometimes the differences are very obvious and sometimes they are a little bit more subtle. For these two, for example, it rains in the Silent edition. So like I said, I'm not completely sure yet how to feel about these decks. I think the size is really cute. The overall quality of the decks is lovely, the cardstock, the backs. I just don't know if the images speak to me enough to actually want to use in a reading. And I kind of feel the same about the Monsoon Tarot as well. So I should maybe keep that in mind for the future. For now, I am happy to have these two in my collection and see if I can find ways to use these. And that's the Exile Tarot, the mini versions in a tin, the Silent and the Awaken editions. Another Kickstarter that arrived was the Little Bird Tarot by Shanna D. Shanna has her own YouTube channel here on TarotTube, and I highly recommend checking out her videos if you haven't seen any of them yet. I will link her channel down below. Like I said, this was a Kickstarter, and I have to say that I really need to give credit to Shanna for just doing an absolutely amazing job with the whole campaign. As far as I was concerned, it was all very smoothly and very quickly, while also just delivering absolutely beautiful quality. As you can see, the deck comes in this hardcover box that has a magnetic closure and folds all the way open, which is really lovely. The inside has these really beautiful details. The guidebook is a little field guide, which is adorable. And as you might have already noticed, this whole deck is based on illustrations by John James Audubon, a naturalist and painter who painted birds. And I think this was like a black core linen cardstock. It sounded very fancy, but most importantly, for the riffle shufflers amongst us, this is a very satisfying, lovely shuffle. Cards are quite slippery, so you have to be a little bit careful when handling the deck. The cards don't go flying about. First of all, I think this is an absolutely beautiful deck. Obviously, the illustrations are very beautiful, and it is always so very lovely to not just have like a book that is in your bookcase that has beautiful illustrations, but to have those beautiful illustrations on a deck of tarot cards, because suddenly it's interactive, you can actually use it, you can display it easier, and I don't know, it's just one of the many reasons why I love tarot so much. So to have this very specific deck featuring all these very beautiful paintings of birds is in itself a lovely thing to have in my collection. That being said, I really gave it some thought whether or not I should back this deck. Now, I always love to support creatives out there, especially when you already know them from YouTube, for example. It's just a very lovely thing to be able to support each other that way. At the same time, I also really try to be very critical about what I'm bringing into my collection and into my home. I don't want to bring in decks that I will never use or that I will then have to rehome. So I really gave it some thought whether or not I should back this deck, because I was a little bit worried that a deck filled with nothing but birds would speak to me enough. And I know I just showed you a deck full of frogs, but those were illustrated with the tarot in mind. So, you know, they were a little bit more animated and related to the tarot meanings. Whereas here we are seeing existing paintings of birds. I am very happy that I decided to back the deck in the end. Shanna has done an amazing job with matching the different paintings with the different meanings and has put a lot of thought into what to use for which card. I've also really enjoyed using the deck, and that is also mainly because of the wonderful little guidebook that is provided with the deck. It is very obvious that Shanna has put a lot of time and effort into this little field guide. Every entry holds a little illustration of the card and then a keyword. and any birds or plants or trees that are featured. And then we go into the meaning. And it kind of differs per card. Sometimes there are little, almost like journal prompts there. And you know that I really, really love those. So this little guidebook has really shown its value when using the deck. In the end, I am very happy that I backed this deck. It's not only a very beautiful and aesthetically pleasing deck, but just also a very lovely deck to have in my collection to do readings with. And that is the Little Bird Tarot. And the last deck that I want to show today is the Bestiary of Women by Hannah Tricoire. I hope I'm pronouncing that the right way. In any case, Hannah is the creator of the Self-Love Tarot, which is without a doubt one of my most beloved and used tarot decks in my collection. So when I saw this project popping up on Kickstarter, I decided to back this one as well. So this is quite a lovely project, and I believe Hannah has created this one with her mother. And it features quite a chunky deck and a hardcover book. So as you can see, the deck comes with a little guidebook as well for those who did not order the additional hardcover book. And I have to admit, I haven't worked with this deck yet. I am not sure if I will ever really work with it as a tarot deck or if I will use it as a sort of study material. As you can see, it is quite a chunky deck. I'm kind of having trouble handling it. This deck holds 108 cards featuring goddesses, mythical, legendary and folk women with animal futures from all the continents and 45 countries and cultures. I think Hannah's illustration style is just so whimsical and colorful and very unique. The cards do feel a little bit papery, meaning that I don't think there is a lot of coating on it or anything. They feel a little bit as if they could get easily damaged, which is maybe another reason why I wouldn't really choose to work very intensively with the cards as a tarot or oracle deck, but more as a source of stories and inspiration that I can explore further. And of course, the book is therefore a lovely addition. It's just really, really beautiful quality. And it is very clear that a lot of love was put into this project, which is always very lovely to see. So even to have only the book and just see it as a lovely collection of illustrations and stories would be a treasure in and of itself. And then of course you could also use the deck. And that is the Bestiary of Women. So that's it. Those were the things that I loved in July. It was a month where I tried to ground myself again back home, away from the forest. where I explored new ideas and possibilities, and where I officially started my Druid path. So even though I was a little bit sad about leaving behind the forest and returning back to society, I am also so very happy that I managed to focus on moving forward and trying to find my own path. And I am very excited to find out what that path will bring me in the upcoming year or so. If you have any questions or would like to see or hear more about certain topics or things that I've shown here today, please feel free to leave me a comment down below. In any case, thank you so much for traveling along and for following my journey. I really appreciate your company. And with all of that being said, I wish you all a lovely rest of your day or night, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!